Well, good morning. My name is Jim House. I'm a professor in the Department of Food and Human Nutritional Sciences at the University of Manitoba, and I'm the lead for the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy and also a member of the Protein Strategy Advisory Board. It's my great pleasure to join you today to present on an initiative called the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy, Sustainable Protein Innovation, which is really set up to define the research ecosystem in Manitoba as it relates to sustainable protein. To begin, I'd like to just acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. To begin, I'd like to set the stage for what we mean by sustainable protein. In our definition, we are choosing to use the definition of the FAO, which looks at sustainability from 4 dimensions: health, environment, sociocultural aspects, and economic aspects. And you can see the definitions that are the components that are placed within these different dimensions as stated by the FAO and the United Nations. So for example, within health, looking at reducing the risk of chronic diseases. Within the environment, looking at maintaining greenhouse gas emissions and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, preserving biodiversity. From an economic standpoint, looking at affordable food for everyone is one example, and also secure and sustainable transportation and supply chains. Certainly something that we've come to recognize over the past 2 years has been a challenge with respect to ensuring stable supply chains. And finally, from a sociocultural perspective, looking at accessibility as an example, and also respecting cultural practices, knowledge and consumption patterns, to ensure that we have a food system that truly reflects an overall sustainability across these 4 dimensions. And what we'll be putting onto this model is the protein lens. With respect to the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy, it started in September of 2020. And really the objectives of the strategy were to develop key research priorities related to innovation in plant and protein production and processing from both animal and plant perspectives. The creation of a knowledge exchange framework for the sustainable protein research community. And I'll explain a little bit more about what we mean by that in just a moment. And also the creation of a research network for sustainable protein production and processing, including researcher expertise, available infrastructure, and analytical equipment. The strategy as established really looked at a series of surveys and qualitative analysis to understand and define the expertise and the infrastructure that exists within Manitoba as it relates to research related to sustainable protein, both animal and plant protein. And we polled researchers from across academia, industry, government, and other NGOs to look at the expertise that exists within Manitoba. And based on our survey and our analysis of the results, we were able to look at researcher expertise across the food system, from primary production all the way through to transportation and distribution. And certainly when we were looking at the main areas of research that we heard from our researchers really was in the primary production, followed by protein food processing. You can see this doesn't add up to 100% because researchers were allowed to select multiple categories. But certainly from the researchers' perspectives, you can see that primary production, protein food processing, safety and nutrition were the top 3 areas of research that really defined what our research community was engaged in. And so we can see that there's tremendous potential across the entire food system. And also it does point to some gaps and potential areas for reflection about additional resources and opportunities for expansion. We then polled the research community about what factors would be limiting your ability to conduct research in sustainable protein. And overwhelmingly, the number 1 answer was funding. And I think there's a number of aspects there. Understanding the funding ecosystem, both in the province, in Western Canada, and globally for that matter. but also within the current framework of the funding environment, looking at how we can create collaborative opportunities to take advantage of matching programs for research funding. I think there was a recognition that more information was required about how to establish appropriate collaborations. And again, it really highlighted the need to establish this database of expertise and an ability to connect researchers so that they could capitalize on funding programs both within Manitoba and across Canada. So certainly funding was one of the #1 areas that was reflected on by our research community, but also training of highly qualified personnel. I think there's a recognition that we have tremendously successful programs for training HQP, but we need to reflect on the types of HQP that are needed for the economy today, and certainly the types of skills, including a knowledge of the expertise, knowledge of those 4 dimensions of sustainability, ensuring that we have HQP that can not only provide the technical skills, but also have the skills and the professional skills that are required by today's industry sector. Collaboration with industry, another key point. Currently, just having an understanding of who is positioned within an industrial setting, so that we can look at these opportunities for enhancing research, and in particular applied research that's going to have an impact on enhancing economic activity, and also ensuring that we're addressing the key issues as it relates to overall sustainability of our systems, including the challenges that we currently have with respect to climate change. And then one other example that I highlight from this chart is access to highly sophisticated research infrastructure. There's a recognition that approximately 40% of the researchers were needed to either have access to new equipment, alternative types of equipment, or just a knowledge of what equipment does exist within the province. So again, these are all highlighting the need for ensuring that we have a framework in order to point to the expertise and equipment that is available within the province. When we actually looked at the expertise and across the sector, we were able to identify, again, expertise across the food system. And we asked the researchers, what areas do you think could deserve further attention? So this is our initial foray into understanding potential gaps from the perspective of researchers. And you can see that across the food system, from primary production all the way through to end usage, there's a number of examples. And if you can read the highlighted bullets there under each of these icons to get examples, and these slides will be available to the registrants through the chat box. They'll link to the chat box, and so I encourage you to download the reports that are available to look more in depth at these particular components. But just to give some examples, for example, in the area of packaging, looking at extending shelf life or environmentally friendly packaging, certainly a very key area for most of the industry sector as we look to reduce the usage of packaging in our food system. And that's just one example of areas that the community felt that there needed to be additional focus. In doing our surveys, one of the key components that we were identifying, and the key elements that we were identifying, was the research capacity, the expertise that exists with Manitoba, and the infrastructure. So through our survey processes and our interview processes, we established a fairly significant database of expertise and infrastructure. And that formed the basis of what we're calling the Sustainable Protein Research Network. And this network is really a searchable database. So we have collected the database. We have had a beta version that was established. And now we have just received funding from Protein Industries Canada to continue to enhance the database, make it searchable across different platforms, and also to extend it to other jurisdictions beyond Manitoba. And so we're looking forward to continue to evolve this the Sustainable Protein Research Network, and with the funding from Protein Industries Canada and in collaboration with Emily, the Enterprise Machine Learning Initiative, will be able to create a searchable database that will advance the capacity to do protein research within the province and within the prairie regions. Another key element that was part of the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy was the undertaking of a gap analysis. And so through not only surveys, but a gap analysis workshop that we held in the fall of 2021, we were able to identify and then further delineate key components across really 4 themes that were resonating as major gaps representing top priority areas in Manitoba. And these can be broadly defined under the themes of climate resiliency. In particular, an example there would be looking at the impact of climate change on protein crop and also on our animal and livestock production systems. Development and processing was another key theme in sustainable protein research. The impact of digital agriculture and the ability to use, for example, the Internet of Things to advance our understanding and as it relates to precision agriculture. And then finally, a key area as it relates to co-product utilization, looking at how we can look, for example, at reducing water use in our food processing sectors. So under each of these themes, we've developed a number of different priority areas. And I encourage you to look at the full report for a more exhaustive description of the key points that are showing up in our gap analysis. But this slide highlights a few. I won't read them all, but certainly for example, the top one's crop nutrient management aimed at the reduction of greenhouse gases, targeting net zero emissions, for example. Another example would be focusing on the circular bioeconomy and the interface between livestock and plant protein sectors. So all of these points here relate to climate resiliency of sustainable protein food systems. And these are gaps which can help inform where priorities should be placed in the next funding cycle, for example, of looking at opportunities for advancing our knowledge as it relates to climate resiliency. The second theme was around novel sustainable protein product development and processing. And again, there's a host of specific priorities that were developed under this theme that came out of the gap analysis exercise. For example, looking at efficient protein extraction methods for enhancing protein isolates or protein concentrates coming from our sources within Manitoba. Understanding processing impact on human health and consumer acceptability, for example. And then again, development of sustainable and functional packaging. So these are all fit broadly under the theme of sustainable protein product development and processing. The third primary theme was around digital agriculture to enable sustainable food systems. And here we're looking at, for example, the use of precision livestock farming as one example. And as I mentioned earlier, using the Internet of Things, or IoT, or the connectivity of sensors, to look at the multitude of data that's coming from production systems and how we can link that data and use artificial intelligence, for example, to enhance our production systems and the sustainability of our production systems. And then the final theme that we had identified during the gap analysis process was on effective co-product utilization, consideration of waste and water and co-products. And for example, here looking at doing full life cycle analysis on co and byproducts, full characterization of byproducts, and looking at overcoming regulatory hurdles, for example, in the animal feed industry. And then one example is they're ensuring that these co-products can be approved by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for use in livestock feeding. These can be real challenges, and there's other regulatory challenges that can be overcome around the use of co-products within our sustainable protein systems. So that's a quick overview of the 4 research themes that came out of the gap analysis exercise around research priorities. Ultimately, when we looked at defining the key recommendations that came as a result of the Manitoba Protein Research Strategy, the key recommendations that we're positioning is that the need to continue to evolve the research strategy under the leadership of a protein research chair, which has been a commitment of the Manitoba government under the Protein Advantage Strategy. Certainly looking at strengthening collaboration within Manitoba's robust protein research ecosystem and guide programming to advance the research strategy. And we feel that that protein database, the Manitoba Protein Research Framework, will really help guide the community into understanding who's out there, how we can make new relationships, what capacity we have, what expertise we have. Looking at focusing our efforts on research projects identified under the 4 themes, strengthening synergies between government, the research community, and industry through networking opportunities and digital tools, through the development of the Sustainable Protein Research Network, collaborate with global experts and institutions to advance common strategic priorities in protein research and innovation, and develop targeted programming to fund the recommended research priorities. And this is particularly important. We heard this a number of times, to ensure that this targeted program is really there to assist the small and medium enterprise, or SMEs. One of the key initiatives over the last year that we're very proud of was the implementation of the Manitoba Sustainable Protein Research Symposium, where we held a combination of, in a virtual format, a combination of plenary lectures and presentations from not only our students, but also our community in general. And we're holding the 2nd annual Manitoba Sustainable Protein Research Symposium, which will be mostly virtual. And so we're asking you to save the date, June 7th to 9th of 2022, where we'll be holding a 2-day Sustainable Protein Research Symposium, followed by a 3rd day, which will be what's called an AIM Day. And this is in partnership with the Manitoba Industry Academia Partnership. And what we'll be doing there is putting industry and those that have specific research questions together with the research community. And the whole focus of AIM Day is to look for solutions. And there's funding available for individuals and groups to come together during this exercise to look at the ways in which we can address specific problems that the sector has. And so we'll be providing more information on that, and you'll find a link in the chat box to give you a little bit more information on this Sustainable Protein Research Symposium that is targeted for June 7th and 9th. We're also hoping to have an in-person evening networking event, and so look for more information on that, because it's been 2 years for our students, our HQP, and their industry sector, and all of our stakeholders have really had a chance to engage in an in-person event. And hopefully by June, we'll be able to hold a networking event to enable our HQP and students to really have an opportunity to engage across the sector. With that, I'd just like to acknowledge the funding that we received through the Canadian Agricultural Partnership and the Government of Manitoba, Governments of Canada, and through guidance from the Protein Consortium. And I'd also especially like to recognize members of the Protein Steering Committee, Research Associate Aaron Goldberg, who was key to the successful execution of this strategy, as well as our consortium members, Dixon Gould, James Pattersville, Mavis McRae, Corey Feshik, and Myrna Grahn. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions. There will be an opportunity to pose questions in the chat box, and I encourage you to place those questions, and we'll endeavor to answer those during the session. Thank you very much.